I met him on a Thursday. That's the detail I can't seem to shake, no matter how much I wish I could. It wasn't some spooky Friday night, no creaking floorboards or thunderclaps. It was a Thursday, bright, boring, and perfectly normal. I was standing in line at the coffee shop near my office, scrolling through emails, when I heard someone say my name. Not miss or excuse me, my name. Full name. I turned, and there he was, smiling, like we'd met before. "Hey," he said, in this casual, friendly tone that implied a shared history I didn't remember. It's been a while. I didn't recognize him. Tall, maybe mid-40s. Dark hair with flecks of gray at the temples. A neatly trimmed beard. Expensive coat. The kind of man you'd glance at and think executive, maybe a professor. But there was something in his eyes, an intensity like he was studying me, measuring every tiny reaction. "I'm sorry," I said, awkward smile, because I'm polite by default. "Have we met?" He chuckled. "You don't remember me. That's okay. It's Harold." I almost said I don't know any Harold, but instead I just nodded and turned back toward the counter. I didn't want to invite conversation. That was the first time I ever heard the name. And it was also the first time I felt watched. I didn't think about him much until 3 days later. I was walking home from the grocery store, arms full of bags, when I saw him again, across the street this time, leaning casually against a lamppost. Not looking at me directly, but angled just enough that I knew he was aware of me. The light changed, and he didn't cross. Just stayed there, smiling faintly. That smile stuck in my head the whole night. Not warm, not flirtatious, just knowing. The third encounter wasn't a coincidence. I'm sure of that now. I'd left work early, something I never did, and decided to take a different route home to avoid the rush hour crowd. I was cutting through a narrow side street, phone in my hand, when a voice said, "You change your hair." I froze. He was there, at the end of the alley. Same coat, same beard, that same fixed, quiet smile. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Look, I don't know you." "Yes, you do," he said, and for the first time there was no smile. "You just don't remember yet." That was the first night I had trouble sleeping. Not because of what he said, but because, deep down, I felt something I didn't want to admit. Some part of me believed him. The visitor in the photograph. I didn't sleep the first night after meeting Harold. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, not doing anything overtly frightening, just looking. The kind of look that didn't end when you turn away. I'd sit up in bed, check the window, check the hallway, and still the look was there. At some point, around 3:15 in the morning, I decided to dig through some of the old things I'd inherited from my grandmother. She had lived in this house before me, and if Harold was some neighbor or town oddity, she might have mentioned him. I opened a wooden box she used to keep under her bed. Inside were dozens of black and white photographs from the 1940s and 50s. Smiling faces at picnics, fishing trips by the lake, people in stiff Sunday clothes posing on the front porch. And then, there he was, Harold. Same expression, same distant, unblinking stare, same neatly combed hair, except the photograph was dated 1948 in her handwriting. That was impossible. Harold looked exactly as he did when I saw him that afternoon. Not a wrinkle, not a single sign of age. I stared at the picture for so long my eyes burned. The edges of it felt damp from my sweaty fingers. When I finally set it down, my hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the box. I told myself it could have been a relative who just looked like him. Maybe a great uncle. A coincidence. But when I flipped the photograph over, my grandmother had written something in faded ink. He said his name was Harold. That's not true. The next morning, I called my mother. She remembered Harold vaguely, said he was just someone who showed up sometimes. No one knew where he came from. He wasn't a neighbor, wasn't family, but he would appear in the background of gatherings, never invited, never acknowledged. And everyone, including my grandmother, would just let him be there. When I asked her why, her voice dropped to a whisper, because once you talk to him, he comes back. That night, I dreamt I was standing in my hallway. The lights were dim, and there was a low hum, like old fluorescent bulbs, except I don't have any in the house. Harold was standing at the far end, half in shadow. He didn't move, didn't blink, but the hum grew louder, almost deafening. My skin crawled with static. When I woke up, my bedroom door, which I had locked, was wide open. and Harold was in the photograph on my nightstand. The photograph I had never put there. The walls start to whisper. The next morning, sunlight poured through my blinds, but it felt fake. Like the light was painted onto my walls rather than coming from outside. The air in my apartment was heavy, damp even, though I couldn't find the source of the moisture. My coffee tasted faintly metallic, as though the water had passed through old, corroded pipes overnight that I tried to distract myself by getting ready for work, but as I buttoned my shirt, I realized I couldn't shake the feeling that Harold, no, the man I'd met, was still close. The kind of close you feel when someone is standing just behind you, watching. I checked every corner of my apartment, opened every closet, even peeked under the bed. Nothing. Still, I couldn't convince myself I was alone, and on my way out, I noticed something peculiar. The apartment door across from mine, which had been sealed with police tape months ago after its tenant abruptly disappeared, was slightly ajar. I paused, my hand on my own doorknob, and stared at the thin strip of darkness between the frame and the edge of the wood. It was only open by an inch, but from that sliver, a smell crept out, sweet at first like overripe fruit, then sour like meat left out too long. The scent was faint, but enough to curl in my stomach. I should have gone straight to work. I should have ignored it. Instead, I stepped toward the door. The hallway light above flickered once, just as I reached out and nudged it open. It swung with almost no resistance, revealing a blackened, dusty interior. The blinds in the windows were drawn, slanted just enough to let in pale shafts of light that illuminated floating dust motes. The air inside was thicker, damper, and that sickly sweet odor clung to the back of my throat. And then, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping from deeper inside the apartment. Slow, deliberate. It sounded like someone drumming their fingers on wood, tap, 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 and then stopping as though they were listening for me. I called out a shaky, "Hello?" No response, but I knew, without a shadow of doubt, that someone was in there. The door creaked behind me as if to warn me, but I stepped in anyway, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. My eyes darted around the living room. The furniture was covered in thick white sheets, each one slightly misshapen, as though something underneath had warped them over time. And then I saw it, on the far wall above the couch. A single word scrawled in jagged black marker. Harold. Only, the letters were uneven, slashed into the paint, not written, and something about the way they tilted felt wrong, as if whoever carved them didn't quite understand the way letters were supposed to look. A cold rush went through me. Behind me, the tapping started again, this time closer. The library had become quieter than I thought possible. No rustle of pages, no distant hum of the fluorescent lights. Only the shallow, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. I was still standing at the end of the West Wing aisle, staring at the gap where Harold had been a moment ago. He'd vanished behind a row of old, warped shelves, the ones marked local archives in peeling gold letters. That section wasn't open to the public. I knew that because I tried to enter once, months ago, and the door had been locked with a heavy chain. Yet Harold had slipped in without a sound. I hesitated, feeling my palms dampen. Every instinct told me to leave, to just walk back toward the brighter part of the library and pretend I hadn't seen him. But that same strange pull, the one I'd felt since the first day I met him, was stronger. It was like my curiosity had teeth, digging in and dragging me forward. I moved slowly down the aisle, the carpet muffling my steps. The further I went, the more the light seemed to thin out, as if the air itself was swallowing it. My fingers brushed the spines of old books, their covers gritty with dust. Many had no titles left on them, just faded leather and faint indentations where letters used to be. When I reached the local archives door, it stood slightly ajar. No chain, no lock. The air leaking from the crack was colder than the rest of the library. It smelled faintly metallic like the inside of a coin jar, but also damp, like water had been sitting somewhere it shouldn't. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was nothing like I'd expected. It wasn't a small storage closet. It was deep, much deeper, the kind of space that shouldn't exist in an old municipal building like this. The walls were lined with shelves crammed with books and boxes, but the far end of the room was lost in shadow. No windows, just a narrow, flickering light overhead, buzzing irregularly. And there, about 20 feet in, stood Harold. His back was to me, his shoulders hunched. He was facing a long table piled with stacks of yellowed newspapers, loose photographs, and folders tied with string. I almost called his name, but something in me held back. I took one step inside. The carpet here was different, thicker, softer, and strangely muffled, as if sound didn't bounce in this room at all. Harold didn't turn around, but he spoke. "You shouldn't be in here." His voice was calm, too calm. I opened my mouth to answer, but my words died when I saw what he was holding. It wasn't a book. It was a photograph. He set it down carefully on the table, then slid it toward a neat little row of others. I stepped closer, just enough to see. They were all photographs of people. Black and white, old, creased. Some were formal portraits, others candid shots. Every face was serious, unsmiling. And in every single one, the same man appeared, sometimes in the background, sometimes right beside the main subject. Harold, only not quite. His clothes were different, the years wrong. In one photo, he was in a suit from the 1940s. In another, he stood in a street scene that looked like the late 1800s. But his face never changed. Not older, not younger, just the same. My mouth went dry. Harold finally turned his head toward me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes looked sharper than they ever had before, like the color had been drained from them, leaving only a cold, clear focus. "Do you understand now?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was a blur of questions, each one darker than the last. Harold stepped closer to me, slow and deliberate, the space between us shrinking. He stopped just a few feet away, tilting his head slightly, like he was studying me. "You shouldn't have followed me here," he said again. But this time, there was something else in his tone. Not warning, not anger, something closer to inevitability. Behind him, deeper in the room, I thought I saw movement. A shifting shadow, too tall to be a person. The light above flickered hard, buzzing in short bursts. When it steadied again, Harold was closer. Much closer. And then, without breaking eye contact, he smiled. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile. It wasn't comforting. It was the kind of smile that made my stomach drop because it felt like he just decided something about me. And whatever it was, I wasn't going to like it. The knock came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze, still clutching the phone, even though there was no dial tone anymore. It was like the line had gone dead the moment I'd whispered hello, as if whoever was on the other side had been holding their breath, listening, and then decided they'd heard enough. "Harold," a voice called softly from behind the door. Not loud enough for the neighbors to hear, but loud enough to crawl under my skin. The name made my stomach turn. "Harold." I told the landlord, the mailman, the bank, everyone who needed to know. My name wasn't Harold. It never had been. But here it was again, creeping back into my life like a disease I thought I'd cured. I didn't answer. The air felt thick, my pulse climbing up into my throat. "Harold, you forgot something." There was no warmth in the voice, no pleading, no recognition. Just flat certainty. And the way they said forgot, like they knew exactly what it was, and that I didn't want to remember. I stepped back, careful not to make the floorboards creak, my eyes never leaving the crack under the door. A shadow shifted there, too still to be a passing stranger, too patient to be a lost delivery guy. My mind went back to the photo I'd found the week before. The one slipped under my door in a plain white envelope. The one that showed me, or someone who looked exactly like me, standing in front of a rundown house I'd never been to. The back of the photo had just one word written in shaky ink. "Harold." The knock came again, sharper this time. "Open the door, Harold. It's been long enough." I backed into the kitchen, tried to remember where I'd left the big chef's knife, when the air in the room seemed to shift. Not colder, heavier, like the walls were leaning in, listening. I knew something then in the marrow of my bones. If I opened that door, I'd never be able to close it again. And if I didn't, they'd find another way in. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, or rather the absence of him. That empty silhouette at the end of the hallway, watching, waiting. The landlord's warning repeated in my head. Stop asking questions. By sunrise, I had convinced myself I was being paranoid. I even laughed about it while making coffee, as if I could dissolve fear in boiling water. But the laughter died when I saw something new. On my kitchen counter, there was a folded scrap of newspaper. I hadn't put it there. It was yellowed and brittle, dated November 12, 1983. The headline read, "Local teacher found dead, suspect missing." The photograph beneath it was grainy, but the face was the same man I'd seen in the hallway. The same thin frame, the same slick back hair. Only here, the caption named him. Harold Dixon, age 37, wanted for questioning. But that wasn't what froze me. It was the article's first line. Neighbors report Harold Dixon had been living alone for several months under a different name. I dropped the paper like it was burning my hands. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, as though the walls were leaning in. My pulse pounded in my ears, a wild drumming that drowned out thought. I grabbed my phone and snapped a photo of the article, then texted it to a friend who worked in archives. I didn't tell him why I wanted it, only that I needed to know everything. Minutes later, I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway outside my apartment door. Slow, measured. I held my breath, phone clutched tight. Then a whisper, so faint I wasn't sure if it was real. "You shouldn't have found that." The doorknob twitched. And then silence. The banging at the door stopped. Not gradually, but in a way that felt like someone had pressed mute on reality. The apartment was so quiet, I could hear the faint buzz of the fridge from the kitchen. Except I didn't remember turning the fridge back on after unplugging it earlier to check that weird smell. I didn't want to go to the door, but the silence made it worse. I leaned forward slowly, trying to catch any sound, a shuffle, a breath, anything that would tell me they were still there. Nothing. Then 3 soft knocks. Not loud, not urgent, just polite, like someone was trying to remind me they had all the time in the world. My throat tightened. I managed to whisper, "Who's there?" There was a pause. Then from the other side, "I think you know." It was my voice. Exactly my voice. But there was something off. The timing of the syllables was too precise, like it had been recorded and was being played back. I staggered backward, my heel catching on the rug, almost falling. My hands started trembling, and I realized the apartment was colder than it should have been. My breath came out in faint clouds, even though the heater had been running all day. And then I heard it, from inside my apartment, the same phrase in my voice. "I think you know." It came from the bedroom. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the kettle hissing in the kitchen. For a moment, I thought I was back in my old apartment before any of this began. The smell of coffee drifted in, warm and inviting. I almost smiled, until I remembered. The kettle wasn't mine. I didn't own one. I froze in bed, heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear the faint clink of a mug being set down. The sound so precise, it was like the person in my kitchen wanted me to know they were there. I didn't get up right away. I lay perfectly still, forcing my breathing to stay slow. The sound stopped. Then, 3 soft knocks on my bedroom door. Not frantic, not aggressive, just patient. "Are you awake?" The voice was calm, deep, almost gentle, but I had never heard it before in my life. I didn't answer. After a pause, the voice spoke again, closer now, as if the speaker had leaned in toward the wood. "I made you coffee. You should drink it before it gets cold." I slid silently out of bed, stepping backward toward the far wall. My phone was on the nightstand, but when I reached for it, my fingers touched nothing. The space was empty. The knocks came again, this time harder. "Don't make me come in." I glanced at the window. I lived on the 4th floor, but my mind was already calculating the drop. Then I heard the handle turn, slowly, deliberately, and I realized there was no lock on my bedroom door. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate drag across the floor, like someone pulling something heavy just beyond the wall. I pressed my ear to the cold wood, but the instant I did, the noise stopped. Silence. Only the faint hum of the wind outside filled the air. I tried to convince myself it was the pipes again, or maybe the old structure settling. But then there was a knock. Not on the front door, not on the windows. A soft, steady knock directly from inside the wall I was leaning against. I jerked back, my breath catching. The knocking didn't speed up, didn't slow. It was patient, rhythmic, as though whatever was inside had all the time in the world. Then came the whisper. It wasn't clear at first, more like a voice half buried under static. But as I strained to listen, the words began to form. "Let me out." The voice was low, ragged, and impossibly close, as if the speaker's lips were pressed right against the other side of the wall. I stumbled back toward the center of the room, but the knocking followed me. The sound moved along the wall, trailing me, tapping in sync with my steps. That was when I remembered the trapdoor. If something or someone was sealed inside these walls, the trapdoor might lead to it. The thought should have terrified me enough to run, but there was a pull, a sick kind of curiosity. I felt almost compelled to open it. I grabbed the lantern from the table, its glass warm against my shaking hands, and crossed the room. The trapdoor was framed by dust and spider webs, the edges worn from decades of use, or maybe for whatever had been clawing at it from below. I knelt, slid my fingers under the metal ring, and pulled. The wood groaned as it lifted, and a wave of stale, freezing air hit me in the face. Somewhere in the dark below, something shifted, and then I saw them. Two pale hands reaching up from the blackness. The forest ahead was no longer just dark. It seemed hungry. The shadows weren't merely the absence of light. They swirled and shifted like living things. The further I went, the more the air thickened, damp with the scent of rotting leaves and something metallic, like blood. Every step I took felt heavier, as though the ground wanted to pull me under. The crunch of twigs beneath my boots was swallowed instantly by the suffocating quiet. It was then I noticed something horrifying. My breath was visible. White fog puffed from my mouth, even though the night had been warm moments ago. Then came the sound. It was faint at first, like a wet, dragging noise somewhere far behind me. A shuffling, deliberate pace, stop, then shuffle again. I didn't dare turn around, but the forest made sure I knew I wasn't alone. The trees began to change. Their trunks twisted unnaturally, their branches curling toward me like skeletal fingers. I brushed one aside, and it left a faint smear of black sap on my skin. I wiped it on my pants, but the cold sensation lingered, like it was seeping into me. The dragging sound was closer now. Finally, I glanced over my shoulder. Through the blackness, I saw it, a figure. Too far to see clearly, but tall, thin, and horribly still between each slow step. Its head tilted in a way that was wrong, as though its neck had too many joints. It didn't hurry. It didn't need to. It knew I had nowhere to run. The room had become a tunnel of breathing darkness. Each inhalation was not my own, but their slow, drawn-out, dragging air in through unseen lungs. I pressed my back against the wall, fingers splayed, feeling the icy seep of the concrete. My flashlight lay shattered near the entrance. In the darkness, the thin red glow from the far end pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. The archivist spoke again. "You've seen too much to leave now. The book is only the beginning." I could barely move my lips, but the words spilled out anyway. "I didn't want this. I was just curious. That is always how it begins," the voice replied, and something heavy dragged itself across the floor. Then I heard it, the sound of pages flipping rapidly, though no one touched them. My eyes adjusted just enough to see the first binding floating in the air, pages whipping back and forth before stopping on a single one. A page with no ink, only a thin smear of something dark and wet. I realized, with cold clarity, that it wasn't ink. A sudden crack tore through the silence as the door behind me slammed shut on its own. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs rooted to the floor. The archivist's tone softened, almost like a lullaby. "You've opened the page meant for you." The smear began to spread, forming letters. My own name. Then, beneath it, a date, today's date. The moment my eyes registered it, the air in the room thickened, pressing against my chest. Shapes emerged from the corners, gaunt, faceless things stitched together with shadows, their movements jerky, marionette-like. They surrounded me slowly, forming a perfect circle. One leaned close, its lack of a mouth stretching into something that felt like a grin. Its fingers, long and jointless, reached toward my chest and stopped an inch above my skin. The archivist whispered from somewhere deep in the walls. "The page must be completed." The shadow's hand plunged through me. I gasped, Not from pain, but from a sensation of something being pulled out. My vision dimmed, the red glow fading, the air growing colder. My last sight before everything went black was my body, still standing, eyes open but utterly empty. And then, silence. When I awoke, I was in the stacks again, though different, older, colder, the shelves stretching higher than I remembered. I looked down at my hands. They were gray, translucent. The archivist stood beside me now, a figure draped in pages instead of cloth. "Welcome," it said. "You are bound here now. Your story is part of the collection." I tried to scream, but no sound came. My voice, my life, had been taken. Somewhere, far away, I heard the library's heavy wooden doors creak open. Footsteps. A new visitor. The archivist turned to me. "Go," it said. "It's your turn to greet them." And in that endless, echoing darkness, I began to walk toward the sound.